Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us once again at our class, Unlocking the Closed Book, wrong class, sorry. Our class of Pet, the mouth is mightier than the sword. Right? That was a quick advertisement for our class, Unlocking the Closed Book. It was actually a mistake, why not? Right? We are starting our class once again. This is a phenomenal class, as Martha pointed out on her comment on Facebook. It is very apropos this week. I mean, every week it's apropos. Every week it's important to learn it, right? But this week's parsha and next week's parsha, because this year they're split, right? Tazria and Mitzora, which a lot of times are together, but this year it's split, right? Talks about the Lashon Hara, not directly, but indirectly, because the Talmud tells us that the affliction of leprosy, spiritual leprosy, tsaras, as we know it, right, comes because one of the reasons that it comes is because of people speaking Lashon Hara, people speaking not properly about other people, right? Lashon Hara, Rechilas, and that is why the affliction of leprosy, tsaras, comes on someone or on their clothes or on their house, right? Different stages to make people aware of what they're doing, and then eventually onto the person. Just regarding that point is a tremendous lesson to learn besides just the laws of Lashon Hara. We're going to get into it in a minute. Just a quick thought, right? The commentaries ask, we don't find this really with anything else, right? The order that the Torah gives it is first the man, then the clothes, and then the house. Next week's parsha will be the house, right? And the commentaries ask, right, why is it, right? Why do we find, right, that there is different stages of this affliction, right? We don't find this anywhere else, right? We don't find it in other, afflictions that one might get. Right. So why is it that this week, right? That we have that, right? That's the question that the commentaries want to know. Why is it that tsaras, right, is the only one where it comes in stages, right? Why is it the only one that comes in stages? There's other afflictions that someone might have, there's other tumors, other impurities, other times that we get punishments, right? But tsaras, right, it comes in stages, and the commentaries explain, right? It's a tremendous lesson, to a concept of discipline, really, and how we're supposed to deal with people, because the way God deals with us, we're supposed to deal with other people. But also it's a tremendous insight that one has to constantly reflect in their own lives. And that is, says a commentary, because God knows that Lashon Hara is a very hard thing to do, right? Our speech, right? What we speak about, right? We constantly speak it. It's hard to control our mouth. Let's be honest. Right? Okay, it's hard to control what we eat. Yeah, but it's not something we're constantly doing, right? So the Torah tells us not to eat pig. The Torah tells us not to eat milk and meat together. The Torah tells us to make sure that our food is slaughtered correctly, right? And everything in between, right? The Torah tells us not to kindle a fire on Shabbos. The Torah tells us not to, do other things on Shabbos. The Torah tells us to be honest in our business. The Torah tells us many, not to kill, not to steal, right? Various, and yes, and within these things, the big picture sounds sometimes easy, and there's nuances, not to kill. There's other things that are connected to that. It's embarrassing people, these things like that. And of course, there's nuances. I don't want to use the word nuances. They're parts of the halacha that are difficult. But Lashon Hara, right? The speaking is something that we do naturally. It's unless someone is, really a very shy person, or someone that is more of a loner, right? It's something that we're constantly doing. Right? We're on the phone nowadays. Okay, back then they didn't have phones, so it was at the marketplace. It was at a dinner party. It was at shul. It was walking in the park, or whatever they did back then, and what we do now. When we see people, it's natural to speak. And it's something that's not easy to control our speech and to be aware of our speech all the time. It's not easy at all. It's something that's hard, something that's constant, something that we have to be constantly doing. And God knows that. Hashem knows that. The Torah knows that. And therefore, Hashem says, I'm going to give you warnings. I'm going to give you warnings, right? The other transgressions, of course, they're hard, right? And for each individual has God created each one of us to have different struggles with different things. Some things are easier, and some things are harder, right? But this is something that's universal. The speaking, talking, supper, on the couch, talking about our day. It's just everywhere, every second. God says, I understand. I'm going to give you a warning. I'm going to make a stage thing. Right? First, it's your house. So realize, hey, what's going on with my house? I just put a fresh coat of paint on it, and all of a sudden, the blotch on it. Right? And then, okay, you do it and you break it, and you didn't get the message, right? Or you did, but it's still hard. Then it's on your clothes. Oh my gosh, what happened? I have to go back to the tailor, right? I have to go back to whatever store I bought it from. This is a defect. There was this American Got Talent. I saw someone post, right, that this girl was changing her clothes, the colors of her clothes magically. Of course, it's the hand, whatever it is, right? Right. So here we go. Our clothes changes. We have blotches on it. Right? Boom. Right? It has blotches on it. Right? This is not a magic trick. Right? This is not a slide of the hand or whatever, however way she did it. Right? This is our clothes get blotches on it. Did we get the message? Did we not? Did we change it? Finally, God says, okay, I give you a chance. I give you a warning twice. Third time, boom, right? You get it on your body. Right? You get it on your body. And even then, right, in the beginning, the Kohen does not, you right away, you don't get sent out of the Machana. You don't get sent out. First, you are secluded, right? And you are told to check it out, right? You're told to check it out, right? And you're not considered yet a Metzora, right? Because you're given time. Didn't change, you still didn't reflect and change yourself, right? Then finally Cohen says Tameh, right? Terasi Tameh, right? And then the punishment of being kicked out of the Machana. So there's stages. God is telling us, God is giving us a chance, right? God is giving us an opportunity to reflect, right? To digest and to realize what's going on in our lives to change. There's two tremendous lessons out of this. Number one, from God's perspective, as a educator, as a enforcer, right? As a parent, as a teacher, as a community leader, right? As a boss, right? We have to give people opportunities. We have to know what is easier or harder for them, and things that are harder for them, we have to give them chances, right? Doesn't mean to say that the chances comes with no consequences at all, right? The house got afflicted, they had to break the wall. They had to cut out the garment. They just spent $10,000 on some fancy who knows what, right? I don't even imagine people spending $10,000 on any piece of clothes, but people do, right? And and boom, they have to cut it out, and then it hits the body, right? So it doesn't mean to say giving a chance doesn't mean to say there's no consequences. It's a smaller consequences. You don't go straight to the big consequence. And then from our perspective, from the afflicted perspective, is we have to realize that when something happens, right, we have to check ourselves out. We have to reflect. We have to say, hey, what are we doing with our lives? Are we going in the right path, right? Are we doing something okay, or are we doing something not okay? I just read this unbelievable story. I either read or heard this unbelievable story. I know we haven't started the halacha yet, but we'll get to it. Right? I'm on this group, this WhatsApp group of a bunch of rabbis. It's really great. The group is just people posting stories, and because stories are very powerful. They say, they ask rabbis or speakers, how often could they, recycle material, right? So you know what they say, a joke, not that often, right? A good story, every couple of years. A Dvar Torah the next day. No, I'm just kidding. But right, a good story is really powerful, and it's a great WhatsApp group that someone through different connections I got connected to. So the story goes like this. It was this Cheloni fellow, right? This person that was taking a bus from Bnei Brak to the airport, right? And he was taking the bus, and he was sitting next to this Cheloni fellow that's a secular person. Cheloni means secular, right? That's what they're called in Israel. Right? So he was sitting next to the secular person, and he was talking to the guy, and somehow they got converts talking, and the guy said, "Oh, I'm a dentist." Oh, very cool, right? Okay, a dentist, right? He said, I want to tell you something. He said, yeah. He said, I don't work on Chol Hamoed. Right? Chol Hamoed, right? The days in between the first days of Pesach and the last days of Pesach, right? The days in between the first days of Sukkot and the last days of Sukkot, right? There's a tremendous discussion in the halacha. Really, one's not supposed to work during that time, right? You could drive cars and things like that, but excessive work or business, unless it's really your business is going to fall apart or things like that. But it's preferable not to work. And I'm not rendering any halachic decision. Every individual case is its own case. Something definitely to reflect on and to think about. Right? But he said, I don't work on Chol Hamoed. He said, okay, like what happened? There's something going on here. I mean, that's a great thing, but like there's so many other things that you could be doing. Why don't you work in Chol Hamoed? So he said he used to work in Chol Hamoed, and it was a great time because a lot of the more, he was a dentist more like the religious neighborhoods, right? And he would get a lot of customers because a lot of other people were closed in, and he was always full on Chol Hamoed, right? And he was always open. He said, but then one time he started reflecting and realizing that for whatever reason, every time during Chol Hamoed, something happened. Right? The windows were shattered. Right? He had some financial other issue. Something was constantly happening. Right? And I could go back to the story. He mentioned a couple of things. I remember saying his windows were broken. But other things, the machine broke, and other things broke. His roof got a leak. Right? Something always happened. Right around Chol Hamoed time. And he stopped and he reflected on it. And he realized that this was something a little strange. So he did he made a calculations of how much he usually made on Chol Hamoed, right? And he then made a calculation, right, of how much damage he usually got. And he noticed that he usually got the same amount of damage of how much money he made. So he decided next Chol Hamoed he's going to close. Let's see if he gets damage again, right? So the next Chol Hamoed he closed, no damage. No damage. He tried it again, no damage. So he said, why should I work on Chol Hamoed and work crazy? I'm not making any money anyways, right? Because I've been getting all these times this damage, right? So that's it. I'm closed on Chol Hamoed. That's my thing, right? So there's a lot of things to learn from it, right? But the point I'm trying to bring out is that this person, right, even though he doesn't keep Shabbat or things like that, and every person under growth, and God forbid we don't judge anybody, but what we could take away from this individual is that he stopped to reflect on the things that were happening to him. He realized that things are not just coincident. He realized that he had leprosy on his house. So he stopped and said, what am I doing? Right? A broken window, right? Car broke down. This, that, all these different things. And this is something that we have to reflect on our lives. And this is one of the lessons from this week's Torah portion. And it is that Saras, right? God does not right away put it onto the person. God gives us a warning. The house first, and then the clothes, and then finally the person. So we said two lessons. Number one, as an educator, as a boss, as a parent, as someone that is of authority, give people chances. Don't come harsh right away at the first time. Realize that people are struggling and having a hard time. Doesn't mean to say they should just get it free. There's still trust on the house. Has to be some kind, but measured. And then from the individual that's getting it, right, we have to reflect and inside and realize things are happening to us, right? The garage door broke. I ran over something. There goes the tire again, right? Small things, big things, the dryer, the this, the that. If we start making calculations of when we were asked for charity, right, and we didn't give it, right, where would I have made more money? Now, I'm not going to say for sure that the tire wouldn't have busted, but there are many stories right? Many times that we reflect and we realize, right, that if we gave that charity, if we gave up some of our time, right, we went to synagogue more, we did these things more, right? A lot of these other things don't happen because it's decreed on Rosh Hashanah how much money we should have, right? So as the Talmud tells us, Zachar, someone that is worthy, will lose their money, not really lose their money, but lose their money to charity. Lo Zachar, if they're not worthy, right, they lose their money to a broken roof, to a leaking roof, broken carburetor, a dryer, right? I just spent $120 on my dryer. I should have given that to tzedakah. I wish I would have given that to tzedakah, right? But it doesn't mean to say things don't happen. Listen, my dryer was 11 years old, right? But I'm not saying for sure, but it's something to reflect on. And it's not only this, it's when we stub our toes or things like that. Let's look at our lives. And that's a tremendous lesson to learn from this week's Parsha, and connecting to Lashon Hara. Number one, right? And really connecting to us, realizing Lashon Hara is not an easy thing. Why did God choose Ve'er of Lashon Hara to teach us this lesson? Because God knows it's not easy. You know, we've had this discussion, we've had questions. It comes up in our homes, in our Shabbos table, it comes up in board meetings, it comes up, just walking in the park, talking to someone on the phone, posting something on Facebook, looking at something on Facebook, right? It comes up all the time. Yep. And it's not easy. And therefore, God said, as Emily just said, yep, right? God says, right? God said, this is the Aveira, this is a transgression. This is the place where I'll teach you these two important lessons. We're going to give it stages. Number one, realize the difficulty that people are going through when you punish them, right? When you give them consequences. Each kid is different. Each adult is different. Some things are easier. Some things are not as easy. And also reflecting internally in ourselves when things happen to us, realizing that there's something to learn from there, realizing there's something to grow from there. All right, so this just some inspiration from this week's Parsha regarding Lashon Hara, right? But also something to teach us in our lives all over overall. Before we move on, any questions or comments on this? I just spoke for a long time. Any questions or comments? Please feel free. No one? Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so the halacha, the dilemma, page 248, day 87, right? 248, day 87. So the dilemma is like this. This is an interesting discussion. So Shimon is talking to his coworker Levi about change in his community. My neighbor Reuven told me that a boy in his son's class was kicked out of school for smoking in the playground. An 11-year-old smoking? It's terrible thing. No one should be smoking, even a 17-year-old smoking, even a 25-year-old smoking. But not for me to judge other people, but 11-year-olds should definitely not be smoking, right? A few days later, right, Levi is at a wedding. The table conversation turns to troubled youth, right? We always like talking about how, when we were kids, everything was perfect, right? But now, everything was like perfect. Now kids are such trouble, right? Our parents talked about the same thing, right? But okay, that's a side point, right? Levi jumps in, right? Listen to this. Shimon's neighbor, Reuven, told him that the kids in his son's 5th grade class got kicked out of yeshiva for smoking. Levi did not know that the 5th grade's father was at the table. He is now furious at Reuven for discussing his son's mistake. Was Shimon speaking Rechilas when he told Levi the story, even though he did not know, would eventually cause bad feelings between Reuven and the boy's father? So there's a lot to unpack, right, in this story. There's side things to point out also, right? But for our purpose right now, right, regarding the halacha of Rechilas, right, and just for me to explain for a minute, right, the dilemma over here, the question, because as we mentioned, Rechilas, right, going back to the source, Rechilas is when you telling someone else or telling the person something that is gonna make them feel bad, right? It's gonna hurt them, right? So for the example we gave last week, right, saying that Uncle Mightier or whatever his name was, right? That was 2 weeks ago. Uncle Strully knows that our family's tone deaf, the tone deaf Tenenbaums, right? Right? Or last week, telling someone that that the other person thinks that he's the one that's creating the machlokas, right? So you're talking to an individual, right? You're talking to an individual, and you are saying something to that individual that will hurt them, and that's rechilos, right? Or you're saying something that will get back to that person, right? That will hurt that person, right? But rechilos, as we said, always good to always go back to the beginning, right? Rechilos is when you say something about someone, right? Again, rechilos, the means of peddling, as a peddler goes about selling his words. In terms of law of speech, rechilos is defined as a statement made by one person to another, which arouses animosity against a third person, right? So I'm telling something to Emily, right, that will arouse her hatred to Jim, God forbid, right? But they love each other; they're great friends, right? But something like that, right? That's rechilos. Reuven is saying something to Shimon, right? That will make Levi upset. So let's say, for example, right, Shimon.
You're saying accidentally or not accidentally.
Right, accidentally or not accidentally, right? So let's say, Shimon, right, went and told the fifth grade. He was at the table, right, and he told the fifth grade this person, right, saying that, oh, you know what Levi told me, right, about a kid in his class, right? So that's direct, even though it's accidental. But when he's speaking over what Levi told him, right, he is now saying something that is creating animosity, creating a upsetness, right, in between, right, Ruvain, right, and Levi, right, because
Dad?
what?
You mean the kid's dad?
The kid's dad.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because Shimon, because Levi told him, right? My neighbor Reuven, I'm sorry, Reuven is talking score with Levi. Right? So Levi, right? I don't want to get too sidetracked by the names. Let's just clear. Levi, I'm going to say it again. Levi, right, is saying what Reuven told him about a kid in the class, right? He was telling Shimon. Well, let's say Levi was at that table, right? Levi was at the table and he said, you know what Reuven told me? Right? So then that's rechilos 100%, because he's telling a group of people without knowing, right? That one of the fathers is there, or the father of this kid is there, right? So he's right now saying something that Levi told him that will now create animosity between this father and Levi. The question over here is that Shimon, Reuven, right, wasn't at the table. He told Shimon. Now, Shimon is not connected to anything. He knows that Shimon's not connected to this story. He knows Shimon lives in a different school district, right? He knows Shimon is not connected to this. So when he told Shimon, he's not saying anything that will create an animosity in between, right? Between Shimon and Levi and anybody, right? So it might be lashon hara, right? It might be, right? So it might be no, because he's not mentioning any names, and there could be 20 kids in that school, in that class. So it might be lashon hara on the class, right? If it's toelas, let's say Shimon wants to know about moving his kid to that school, so he's allowed to know about how the kids are. So we could work out a scenario where there's toelas, right? And it's done in the right way, right? It's done in the right way, right? The question over here is, right? When Levi is speaking to Shimon, right? He knows he's not speaking rechilos. He's, let's say, as we said, maybe Shimon wants to know about the class or things like that. But now when Shimon is sitting at the table, right? Is it retroactively now when Reuven, because he said, you know what Reuven told me, right? Is it retroactively now Reuven, right, speaking rechilos? Meaning to say, is rechilos only when I say something to the other person? But if someone quotes me saying something, right, and now that creates an animosity between the two people, right, is that rechilos, yes or no?
Unintended, yes. Because when you have a group of people and you speak, you don't know what damage you might do. So I'd say it was unintended. But
so on a more practical level, and I'll take your comments in a minute on Jim is saying that unintentionally, right? It happens to come out that way, but since it was unintentional, right? So therefore it's not really, but it's just your words eventually cause someone harm. So what are you saying out of that? It's good, it's bad, it's okay, it's not good.
It's not good. I mean, it's to me, it's lashon hara because you're repeating gossip.
So we're not talking about no. So we're not talking about Levi.
Yeah, I'm talking about when Levi.
No, it's not Shimon. When Shimon.
Okay, I've got it straight here. Levi was the one at the wedding. And
No, Shimon was the one at the wedding.
No.
Shimon is talking to his coworker Levi about a change in his community. Sorry, Levi. Yeah, Levi. Right. Levi. Right. So Levi's at fault for sure. Levi should not be sticking his nose in on this table and giving an example. Right. Levi is at fault, but the question is not Levi. The question is Shimon, when Shimon is telling Levi, right, about.
Is there anything wrong with what he said?
Right. Is he allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Again, let's say Levi wants to know about the school district. So it's not lashon hara what he said. But since the outcome came out, and is it possible? This is possible. It's not unlikely that this happens when you tell someone something, right? So do we look at the future, right? Or we say what is right now? That's not a problem. So therefore you could say it. Go ahead, Emily.
I think if I was Levi and someone was telling me this story, oh, there's a change in the neighborhood, there's an 11-year-old kid who got kicked out because they were smoking. So right away, I would be like, oh, I wonder which kid it is. Like I hate when people do that. And then you start trying to figure out who
okay.
It is. And then it almost creates, like, even though maybe it technically it's not, but you've created a scenario. Now the person, now there's a kid smoking in that class. Which kid is it? I'm going to try to find out, like, you've created that like stumbling block or whatever it is. And now you pique that person's curiosity. And now that person is stuck being curious about who it is. And it's going to create a lot. Like, I don't know. I hate when people do that. Yeah, like people tell me, someone, this is recently, someone told me that this scenario, that this person is having a problem with this person. And what do I do? I'm trying to figure out who it is.
Okay, so that's a valid point, that when we tell someone something, right, we have to, right? Yes, but leaving out the name is a thing. So we have to realize that when we tell someone something, that it might perk their interest and make them curious. That is not necessarily lashon hara or chilus, right? Every person is responsible for themselves, right? This person has to. So give me 1 second, and I want to hear what people have to say on the Zoom also, right? Just give me 1 second. The question over here is very, very, very pointed, and we're trying to bring out a point over here, right? If Shimon was if Levi was allowed to tell, if Shimon was allowed to tell Levi, right, about what Reuven told him or not, right? That is a separate discussion. We are assuming now that he was allowed. Let's say there was a toelis. Let's say Levi asked him, we're thinking of sending our kids to that school. I have a kid in the 5th grade, right? Do you know anything about that school? I know you live there, right? So there might be a toelis, right? And therefore he was vague. Right, he didn't say a kid, right? He was talking vague, and there was a purpose for he was allowed to say it. So let's say we're talking about a scenario where he was allowed to tell Levi that information. Now Levi, right? He has his own laws of lashon hara, his own laws of rechilus, right? He failed, and he went and told at the table, right, what he heard, right? That was not. So he's being vague also, but if there's no toela, so being vague doesn't really help, right? It's not as bad. It's avak lashon hara, right? But avak lashon hara is still a bad thing and still prohibited, right? Avak means like the dust. It's like a part of lashon hara. It's not the actual meat and potatoes of lashon hara, right? But it's like the rice, it's like the side dishes of lashon hara, right? But right, so he's Levi's at fault, right? The question over here is, how far does Rechilas go? When Shimon was telling Levi about what happened, right, he was not being over lashon hara because there was a purpose, he was allowed to say it. But now, retroactively, when Levi couldn't keep his mouth shut, and he went ahead, and he also mentioned that Reuven told him this, right? Reuven told him, right? That Shimon told him what Reuven told him, right? So Levi really couldn't keep his mouth shut, right? Not only is he saying over what the story is, but he didn't say, oh, I heard about this class, right? But he's saying who told him. So now he's creating an animosity between Reuven, right, and his father, right? So now is Shimon responsible for that animosity, right? Retroactively, and therefore retroactively he spoke Mechilas. Yes or no? That's the respect. Yeah, it's Shimon. So Emily says no. Jim is giving me a face.
No, but he's responsible. I mean.
Suzette is shaking her
how
head. No,
far-
really.
How long down the line are we responsible for what someone says? Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Yosef says no. All right. Any other thoughts?
I didn't read ahead, but I think yes, because he mentioned Reuben.
So okay, but that's Levi. Oh, okay. Say Shimon mentioned Reuben. All right. So Shimon gave information that not necessarily maybe he was trying to show that he had good hand information, but at the same time he mentioned Reuben. Okay, that's an interesting point. Thank you, Martha, for that. You could have left that out, right?
It wasn't necessary for the conversation.
I see people shaking their heads like, yeah, that's a good point. Good point, Martha. Anybody else want to chime in? Okay, so let's look at the halakha. The halakha is very interesting, and this shows you how far things go and how careful we have to be. Right? You are responsible for where your words could go once they leave your mouth. You are responsible, right? Saying, well, I was okay. What happens, happens. I posted something on Facebook. It's not my fault. That the internet is free, right? And you are responsible for where your words go once they leave your mouth. You are not allowed to say something that could cause strife if it is repeated. When Shimon spoke to Levi, his words were not rechilas. Ultimately, they became rechilas. Hence, sharing the information where Levi was prohibited. Right? Let me explain. Right? That's.
Oh, you said it. Okay.
Let me, I see, I hear, let me, Suzette is like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to pounce over here, right? Right, let's explain. The Jim and Emily are pouncing on me over here, right? You guys, you come in the house, you can pounce on me too, quicker, right? Right, so, yeah, I have like 2 tables in between me and them, because just in case, I don't need any, right? But let me explain. Look at the last line. And this is where the important thing is, and this is really where the discussion, right, is important. Hence, sharing the information with Levi was prohibited. When we say something, and I think Martha, your point is extremely important, right? When we say something, we have to be careful where those words could end up, and therefore we have to be so careful of what we say, even though there was Toela, so it's not the prohibition of lashon hara. Because I'm allowed to tell this person, right, this information, but we have to think about where it's going to go after that. Chavra Isaleh, the Torah tells us, right, that when I tell someone something, right, you have to assume that it's going to move on, unless you know that person is bound by something, confidentiality, lawyer, client, doctor, whatever, rabbi, right? There are certain times when you know, right, that people are bound by confidentiality. But even then, you have to be very careful.
How do you translate what you just said?
Chavra Isaleh, from a friend to a friend, things move on, right? Isaleh, we'll just pass on, right? Things pass on, right? As a famous saying, the walls have ears, right? It actually comes from the Talmud, right? That phrase. I'm not going to go into it where it comes from, right? But
question.
give me 1 second. Let me just finish this, and then I'll take your question, Joseph. Right? So, meaning to say that Martha, you had a great point, and I did not think about it. Thank you for bringing that up front, right? Bringing that point out. That if let's say Shimon would have said, a friend of mine who knows what's going on there, right? Told me of what's going on in the class over there, that, I'll just give you one example that he told me, right? So now when if Levi goes ahead and says something, right? So he doesn't know who said it. So he said, hey, my friend told me of someone that, and even if he says, right, Shimon told me, right? But the parent is not going to upset at Shimon, because Shimon's not the one that had the information. He got the information from someone else. Maybe it'll be a little bit, why you're repeating it over, but it's not as creating a strife in between, right? Two people that spoke. So yes, there might be ways that you could say to us, we have to be so careful of when we say something, even for Toelas, is it going to come back, right? Is it going to come back to hurt you? Means to say, you have to be careful of where those words go. We are responsible for our words. Levi's responsible for his words too, and he's going to be over Lashon Hara, 100%, right? But Shimon, right, also has to be careful of where our words go. And yes, if it's going to come out that someone's going to get hurt, and then there's rechilas that happens. Oh, I didn't know. You should have thought about it, right? That's all part of reflecting on our words. How we use our words, we have to be very careful. And therefore, if it comes back, it could be rechilas. Yosef, you wanted to say something.
I thought that whether it was Shimon or Levi saying whatever to whoever, that they weren't allowed to they were allowed to listen to it, but they weren't allowed to pass that information on until they could prove it for themselves.
So she's saying regarding going back to how Shimon was allowed to tell Levi this information.
Yeah, how Levi decided to pass it on at the table.
No, Levi was not allowed to pass it on. We're not saying.
So Shimon
Right, so-
Shimon hears about the kid getting kicked out.
Right. So he didn't mention any kid by itself, but
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
if you hear from a reliable source, that is a form of if it's someone that's real, it's not just, you heard people talking a kiddish, right? Or you saw something on Facebook, but if you hear it from a reliable source, right, that told him that, my neighbor told me has a kid in the class, right? So, and this person is a trustworthy person, so that could fall under, having the information. That is reliable. It depends who tells it to you, or it depends how it's said, right? That could be it could be back to saying that maybe Reuven wasn't allowed to say it, that maybe it wasn't Toelas. And let's say Reuven was not allowed to say it, right? The question is, is he now getting two averos? Is there also rechilas? But we're talking in a scenario to say where Reuven was allowed to say it, right? Let's say that was his verification. Sorry, Shimon was allowed to say it, right? He verified it. That was the way his neighbor is a trustworthy person, right? And his neighbor didn't say who it was, right? His neighbor said there was a kid in the class, right? And there's 30 kids in the class, not like Torah Academy where there's 2 kids in the class, right? I mean, 5 kids in the class, right? But there's 30. I had growing up in my class, I had 25 kids in my class, and there's 2 parallel classes. Right, that's just boys. Right, that was a school that there was grades that had 3 parallel classes. Right, so there's tons of kids. So by not saying the name and just saying there was a kid, you try to figure it out. You can knock out this kid, but so it could be he said it in a way that there was no lashon hara. The question now is, regarding the laws of rechilas, and we're saying that's sort of peddler, right? Rechilas is not limited to your conversation. Rechilas is if your words that you're peddling now are eventually going to come and hurt someone, you are responsible for that.
Okay.
Say it in a way where it can't come back and hurt someone. Okay.
Thank you.
Emily,
So let me get this straight. If someone asks you,
talk a little louder.
okay, someone asks you a question, and there's 2 hours for you to answer the question, and you answer the question. Now you can be in trouble for rechilas.
When you answer the question, you have to make sure that your words are not going to create rechilas.
How would you, I don't know how that's possible, because in this scenario, if it was Tehilas, and am I saying that right?
Techilas, you're close.
Yeah.
Not Techina.
And the only thing he could have done was say, instead of my
Toelas.
neighbor told me, Toelas,
That's
thank
it,
you,
Toelas.
Toelas. You said it was Toelas. The only thing he could have done differently is when the guy said something about school, he didn't need to mention his neighbor told me.
You didn't have to.
He could have just said, I understand from a reliable source.
Right, and he said,
However-
and not only did he say his neighbor, he said the neighbor's name.
Okay,
Right.
right, he shouldn't have mentioned.
Let's
that.
say he lives in an apartment
Right.
building that has 50 neighbors.
But that's all he could have done differently.
Yes.
Instead, but you're saying that served a useful purpose, but then it's kind of, then you're also saying, oh, but it shouldn't have, but that statement down the line caused issue. See, to me, you can't have it both ways. You can't say.
So you-
it served
so what-
a useful purpose, but then someone else used it to cause Rahilus, and that's your fault.
No, so that's not, that's what I'm saying. By the
confused.
person saying who told them that's not Lashon Hara. Right? But when you are saying it, you should be careful how you say it. So yes, you could just say, I know from a reliable source, and I don't want to tell you who it is because I don't want to, I don't want it to come back.
But even if
Levi.
Levy, whatever, at the party, Bob, if the party had said, I understand that a kid got kicked out, didn't mention no names, that would have caused Rahilus.
No, because Rechilas is only when one person is, you're saying something about a person that's now going to create a strife between this person and the person that,
Okay.
right? So therefore, Rechilas
Okay,
has to
okay,
be
okay.
that it's an individual with another individual.
Okay.
Right?
Be upset.
You should have said,
And then he
Reuven,
says, what's going on
Shimon,
with this?
Shimon,
Wouldn't have been upset at some-
Shimon should have said that, Levi, I've said, you want to know about the school, I have some information for you. I have a reliable source. I'm not going to tell you who. There's no need to know, right? If you trust me, great. If you don't trust me, don't take this information. But I have from a reliable source that, this class is a troubled class. There was a kid that was kicked out for smoking. Other things happened, right? I have from a reliable source that it's a troubled class. I would tell you to do a lot more research about this class. That's the
The only
information.
thing he
that-
did wrong was calling out that was Ruben who told him.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That caused.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You have to be careful when you say, you think you're okay, it's harmless, right? I'm not, Reuven's, there's no Lashon Hara to Reuven, right? But Rechilas, right, goes down the line, right? Rechilas continues, right? So you have to be very careful, right? You have to be very careful regarding Rechilas of how it's going to play out, from the person that you're telling to, and how that's going to play out.
But Levy shouldn't have even mentioned it at the party.
No, Levi's at fault. Levi's no
Different- two
tzaddik,
different issues.
right? Levi, I mean, he could be the tzaddik, and he wanted to be part of the conversation, right? Which peer pressure is always very, as you see, everybody's talking about it, and he wanted to be part of it. And that's a side point. We see that, when people are talking about things, people want to be part of something, right? You have to hold strong. But yeah, Levi was 100% wrong. Levi did wrong. Right. The question is, by Levi doing wrong, now Shimon, right? I finally got it right. Right? Is Shimon also right getting a transgression now retroactively of Rechilas? And the answer is yes. Okay, any questions or comments on that?
Sorry, so Shimon is getting the Avera of Rechilas when he says the word Ruvain in the initial conversation with Levi, or he's getting the Rechilas when Levi retells the story?
He's getting the very Rechilas when Levi retells a story, but Shimon should not have spoken that way, because since there's a possibility in the future for Rechilas to be said, so therefore, as it says, Levi, if sharing that information with Levi was prohibited. The way he shared that Levi now was prohibited. I'm going to finish in 2 minutes. So that's this halacha, very interesting point. Okay, as I mentioned, just told Jim, I gotta finish in 2 minutes. I have something at 10. So let's just very quickly, I want to do the two things very, very quickly. Please go ahead and read through the paragraph, right? The paragraph, Grow Your Humility, is very powerful. It's a very powerful story, right? Of where someone decided, hey, he got a notification, a bing, right? Happened to be that time. God was giving him that warning. He decided to heed that warning. Again, back to what we spoke about beforehand, that God gives us many different warnings in many different ways, right? Your internet all of a sudden gets, slowly when you're about to look at things that are inappropriate or other things like that, right? God is giving you a sign, right? But the point I want to bring out is we see that listening to someone else before jumping the gun, right, is so powerful and important, right? Because you don't know exactly how the other person saw it, perceived it, exactly what happened, right? This is so important. There's so much to talk about it, but I don't have time right now. And there's something to really be aware of and reflect on, right? The Talmud tells us in Tractate Psachim, right? Whoever loses his temper, if he is a scholar, will lose his wisdom. If he's a prophet, will lose his Holy Spirit. And if he's none of those, right, we don't want to know what happens to him, right? So one should really be careful of not losing their temper, right? One of the best ways of reminding ourselves not to lose our temper is really by listening to the other person, right? Realizing, right, that there's always two sides to the story, realizing that you're not perfect either, right? Realizing that we have to take a step back and reflect, right? And look at the greater picture. And again, there's much more to talk about that too. But I apologize. I got to run, right? Thank you everybody for joining us. I know usually I leave it open for questions and answers, but I got to run. And look forward to seeing you all next week. Everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.